On April 28, 1988, around 1 p.m., Aloha Airlines Flight 243 was preparing for takeoff in Hawaii. It was a beautiful day with plenty of sunshine, and most people were here on vacation. If you don't know Hawaii, it's a group of islands in the Pacific Ocean that are part of the United States. These islands are very beautiful, and the capital is Honolulu. This flight was going from Hilo to Honolulu. Hilo is the most populous island in Hawaii, but the distance isn't much, just a 35-minute flight, a routine flight. Aloha Airlines is a local airline that connects different islands. Since the distances are short, this plane had already taken off 8 times that morning, completing 3 round trips. But this isn't unusual, it's normal for planes like this. The flight was routine, but what happened next would be etched in the memories of the passengers and crew forever. Hi, I'm Noah, and today we'll explore the unimaginable incident of Aloha Airlines Flight 243. Welcome back to Voyage Vault. Everything was going as usual. Passengers were boarding, flight doors were closing, and at exactly 1:25 p.m. the flight took off. But one unusual thing happened here. As a passenger was boarding the plane, she noticed something on the side before entering through the door. She saw that the plane's body was made up of separate sheets attached with rivets, and one sheet had a slight crack. However, she didn't mention it to anyone, thinking, what difference does it make? This is a reputable airline. The plane takes off regularly, and they have regular inspections. If there was a problem, they would notice it. It must be a minor issue. She thought no one could imagine this would be a significant mistake. Just 10 to 15 minutes after takeoff, flight attendants came with drink carts and started serving passengers. The seatbelt sign was still on, as it usually only turns off when the plane reaches cruising altitude, which for this flight was 24,000 feet. There were 3 flight attendants serving drinks to passengers, and exactly 20 minutes after takeoff, the flight reached its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet. As soon as it reached this height, a massive explosion occurred. All passengers heard the loud bang, and sudden rapid decompression happened. Breathing became difficult, and debris flew everywhere, causing total chaos and confusion. Some passengers looked around and saw that the plane's roof and nearby walls were gone. They could see the open sky above. What happened was that about 35 square meters of the plane's front section had separated. Usually, what happens is that airplane cabins are pressurized to maintain air pressure, allowing us to breathe normally. At 24,000 feet, atmospheric pressure drops significantly, making the air thin and difficult to breathe. That's why airplanes have a pressurization system that pumps and regulates air. If the system fails and the plane is at such altitude, oxygen masks drop in emergency cases. Typically, these oxygen masks have 15 to 20 minutes of oxygen, allowing pilots to descend to an altitude where normal breathing is possible below 10,000 feet. However, in Flight 243, the oxygen masks deployed, but the oxygen mask system failed to function. The plane's ruptured roof severely damaged the oxygen mask system. Passengers began experiencing hypoxia, a condition where insufficient oxygen can cause loss of consciousness or death. Within seconds, people felt dizzy, confusion spread, and unconsciousness can occur in 1 to 2 minutes. Michelle Honda, a flight attendant at row 15, attempted to contact the cockpit via intercom after the explosion but received no response. Another flight attendant, CB Lansing, serving drinks at row 5, was blown out of the plane when the roof ripped off. Their third colleague, Jean Sato, at row 2, fell to the ground, severely injuring her mouth. Pandemonium broke out everywhere. When Michelle didn't receive any response from the pilots, she went to each passenger asking, "Do you know how to fly a plane? Do you know how to fly a plane?" Passengers grew more terrified, thinking, "They're asking us if we can fly the plane? What happened to the pilots?" The flight attendants crawled towards the cockpit, and upon reaching, Michelle saw her colleague Jean's head bleeding profusely. She tried to look inside the cockpit but couldn't see anything due to the blocked view. They had only a few minutes before all passengers would lose consciousness. Besides the hypoxia risk, passengers were also exposed to extremely harsh winds almost 500 km/h, making it difficult to keep their eyes open. The temperature at this altitude was -45 degrees Celsius. Survival for an extended period was impossible even with oxygen due to the freezing temperatures. Most passengers wore only shirts and shorts, as Hawaii is a tropical destination with no snow. Michelle, the only conscious flight attendant, persistently tried to contact the pilots, but received no response. Amidst all the danger, there was one reassuring fact: the pilots were alive. Not only alive, but also in better condition than the passengers. The pilots' oxygen masks were functioning properly. Command was in the hands of 44-year-old Captain Robert Skornsteimer, an extremely experienced pilot with 11 years of service at Aloha Airlines. Alongside him was 36-year-old First Officer Mimi Tompkins. When the explosion occurred, both pilots were severely jolted. Turning back, they saw that the plane's roof was gone and the cockpit door was missing. Debris was scattered everywhere, but they immediately focused on their duties. Firstly, they put on their oxygen masks and, assessing the situation, decide to make an emergency descent. Descending from 4,100 feet at a speed of nearly 500 km/h, but the time factor wasn't limited to just lowering the plane. Another significant problem arose. It became apparent that due to the accident, the plane's nose, where they were seated, had dropped about 1 meter. Only the plane's fuselage kept the cockpit and cabin connected. If they continued flying like this for too long, the two sections might separate. Mimi Tompkins contacts Honolulu and informs them of the situation. She's instructed to divert to Maui instead, as it's closer. At 1:48 p.m., Tompkins contacts Maui Tower, reporting their situation. It had been about 3 minutes since the plane's roof ruptured, but thankfully the plane had descended to 14,000 feet. At this altitude, breathing became less difficult for most passengers, and since it happened within 3 minutes, most people avoided losing consciousness, and the hypoxia risk minimized. Mimi Tompkins contacts Maui Airport saying, "Prepare all emergency services. Anything can happen." Numerous firefighters and rescue vehicles position themselves on the runway awaiting the plane's landing. Everyone anticipates the plane's arrival. About a minute later, the plane reaches 10,000 feet. But another problem arises. A massive 10,000-foot mountain, Haleakala Summit, lies directly between Maui Airport and the plane. Captain Robert slows the plane 210 knots, 209 knots, 170 knots. He maintains a steady slow pace to avoid losing control. At 170, they navigate the plane through the islands, avoiding the mountain. The plane turns, heading towards the airport, narrowly avoiding the mountain. That was the turning point when passengers regained hope. They finally realized that their plane had a pilot who was not only alive but also capable of flying the plane safely. As the plane descended towards the runway, Mimi Tompkins lowered the landing gear. 3 sets of wheels should be deployed, 2 rear and 1 forward. The main gear was successful, but the nose gear, the front wheel, wouldn't deploy. Technically speaking, landing without the nose gear or nose wheel is possible, known as a belly landing. This procedure is sometimes used in emergency cases. However, considering the plane's weakened midsection and missing roof, pilots feared attempting this method would certainly result in a crash, potentially triggering a blast if the fuel tank ruptured. With no other options, they had to take the risk. The passengers remained unaware of the impending danger, but the pilots knew the gravity of their situation. They steeled themselves for the challenging landing ahead, hoping for a miracle. Pilots decide to proceed with landing as soon as the runway comes into view. Passengers prepare for landing. Some start praying to God, while others hug those nearby, possibly for the last time. Most passengers remain terrified, and rightly so. As the plane descends, it starts swaying side to side. The pilot realizes the left engine has failed. Attempts to manually restart the engine are unsuccessful. Meanwhile, all emergency services on the runway are on high alert. Everyone prepares for worst-case scenarios, focusing on minimizing damage. At 1:56 p.m., pilots inform Maui Tower, "We'll need all the accommodation you have."
"We'll need all the equipment you've got."
Meanwhile, a man on the runway uses binoculars to observe the plane and notices the nose gear has successfully deployed, eliminating the need for a belly landing. Pilots are informed and their hopes rise. At 1:58 p.m., Aloha Airlines Flight 243 touches down safely on the runway. Captain Robert uses brakes and thrust reversers on the remaining engine to bring the plane to a gentle stop. The emergency teams on the runway breathe a sigh of relief. Passengers are evacuated via emergency exits. Footage of the dramatic evacuation shows passengers sliding down safely. All passengers applaud and thank the captain for saving their lives. Although most were unharmed, several passengers suffered severe injuries. An 84-year-old female passenger in Seat 5A sustained the most severe injuries, including a skull fracture. The passenger in Seat 6A suffered a broken right hand. Passengers in Seats 4A and 4F suffered serious injuries. Flight attendant Jean Cito remained unconscious. Flight attendant Michelle Honda was unharmed and began counting passengers after landing to confirm no one was missing. Miraculously, everyone was alive, except one. 58-year-old flight attendant CB Lansing was the sole fatality in the incident. Search teams made extensive efforts, but unfortunately, her body was never recovered and remains lost at sea forever. The remaining 94 survivors were grateful for their luck, thankful to have made it out alive. Was it just luck? No. Technical equipment played a significant role, specifically seatbelts. As I mentioned earlier, since the flight hadn't reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign was still on and passengers had kept their seatbelts fastened. If passengers in rows 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 hadn't worn their seatbelts, they would have been swept away from the plane. Seatbelts proved to be the primary reason so many lives were saved. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation into Aloha Airlines Flight 243 revealed that the probable cause of the catastrophic failure was metal fatigue, specifically a fuselage crack that had propagated over time due to the aircraft's high cycle count of 89,680 flights. Contributing factors included insufficient maintenance and inspection procedures, inadequate detection of fatigue damage, and design flaws in the Boeing 737's fuselage. The 19-year-old aircraft had undergone repairs, but these did not address the underlying fatigue issue. Inspectors failed to detect the growing crack, and the airline's maintenance schedule did not prioritize frequent inspections of high-cycle fatigue areas. Additionally, the NTSB cited inadequate Federal Aviation Administration oversight and regulation, leading to a lack of clear guidelines for inspecting and maintaining aging aircraft. The investigation concluded that a combination of these factors led to the sudden decompression, resulting in the loss of one life and injuries to several passengers. The incident prompted significant changes to maintenance and inspection procedures, FAA regulations, and Boeing 737 design modifications to mitigate fuselage fatigue.